Invaders from Mars is a science fiction from 1986 directed by Tobe Hooper.
Yes, it's about young David Gardner who awakes during a thunderstorm in the middle of the night. He sees a UFO sort of landing on the hill behind his house. So he wakes up his parents and his father agrees to go and investigate. When he comes back, he's acting a bit strangely. Soon others, including David's mother, they all appear to have a small injury on the back of their neck, which is also strange. David goes to investigate himself and he discovers the alien ship, fortunately evades capture and goes to school, as you do. And trying to tell anyone who'll listen that, there's aliens on Earth. Too many people are acting a bit strange, apart from the school nurse Linda, who doesn't have a mark on the back of her neck. They team up and try to alert the authorities that there's an alien invasion in their small, sleepy town.
This is true. Before we start, can I check the back of your neck? Because
am I acting strangely?
Yeah, no, you're fine. We're all good. Phew. Thank God for that. So, yeah, Invaders from Mars, 1986. This is a remake.
Yep.
Of a 1953 film of the same name, directed by William Cameron Menzies, who actually made Things to Come that we covered on the channel.
Oh, right, yeah.
Have you seen the original of this?
I have to confess I haven't, no.
Oh, okay. Because
I read the plot and it sounds pretty much exactly the same.
It's pretty
apart
much
from slightly different characters.
There's a few things here and there that are slightly different.
Have you seen it?
I saw it. I think they put it on BBC Two years and years ago. And again, it was one of these films that I recorded on VHS, as we would have done in those days, and watched it a lot. And it terrified me. I don't know if it's. I don't know if one of this is the best of the sci-fi films from the 1950s.
There was a lot.
There's a lot of them, and there's quite kind of a handful of like the famous Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Day the Earth Is Still. I've got posters up here. War of the Worlds.
Thing from Another World.
Yeah, exactly. Thing from Another World. There are many of them from that period, and a lot of them got remakes, and a lot of them are very good.
What, the originals or the remakes?
Both.
Both.
I think. The originals are great. They're quirky and I think they hold up to today, especially if you're a fan of them. But Invaders from Mars, it really kind of captivated my imagination at that period. But it was really eerie. And it's still quite eerie today. The music and some of the shots. There's the classic shot of the fence going up the hill, which is where the people go up and disappear under the ground. And there's that one shot of the fence line, which is kind of ingrained in my mind slightly. And I really enjoyed the original one. So obviously this is a remake of that original one, directed here by Tobe Hooper, and it is pretty much the same. It's the same plot. A lot of those films were updated for films like The Fly and The Thing.
I think a lot of them were made more adult, weren't they? Like the ones you mentioned in The Blob and stuff like that. They were quite violent and gory and not for kids. Whereas...
No, and I think that's what I was going to say. I think what's interesting about this one is that this one kind of retains its B-movie sensibility.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of the other remakes of the 80s that remade the films of the 50s. They kind of made them more mature. They made them more slick, more modern, for 80s modern audiences, more adult in places. Whereas this one, it has that B-movie feel. He doesn't take himself too seriously with this film, and I think it doesn't completely work all the time, and it's a bit mad. There are definitely, the ending is different here than in the original one.
Oh, right.
Without giving anything away, the ending that happens in the 1986 one is not the same as the ending.
Well, I read the plot synopsis of the original, and it sounded the same, but maybe
depending which ending we're talking about, I suppose.
Yeah. No, it's definitely family friendly. I know I watched it with two of my kids. Yeah. My 13-year-old said it was the weirdest thing she'd ever watched. But she says that about every film, to be honest. So, but it did make me think, 80s, there is a lot of weird films. They don't really get that anymore. They really leaned into the weirdness in the 80s. And I think obviously the practical effects help because, they look a bit wobbly sometimes. And
that's why
adds to the charm.
I think that's what I always find about, because when we started getting CGI, you kind of think, well, the world's your oyster now with CGI. You can do anything. Yeah, a lot of the time they don't. They just kind of use it for, okay, you can make some monsters and Transformers and robots, and Terminator 2 was the kind of the big one. That was like one of the first CGI films, wasn't it? And that did some quite surreal, weird stuff. But a lot of CGI now, you feel like you look at video games and what they do in video games, they do some quite bizarre things in video games. But with films, not so much. But you go back to the 80s with practical effects and latex, things like Nightmare on Elm Street, what they were doing in that film and other films around that time. Some really awesome, creative, mind-bending Plus, they're all from the 70s and all on drugs still,
Well,
weren't
yeah.
they? So there's probably that too. I think the 80s were really creative, and I think that's what's kind of great about this film. I think it's as enjoyable as the original.
Yeah.
But I think we've got... I mean, it's Tobe Hooper, and I think we did a video ages ago on Tobe Hooper, do you remember? We kind of looked at his career, and we chose a few of his films. I think you spoke about Life Force.
Yep.
And I chose one of his earlier films.
Which, if you're looking closely, there is a clip of Life Force in this.
There is a clip of Life Force in this film. And I think we said in that video that he would put all kinds of different crazy ideas into his films. And some of them work, some of them don't work.
And you've got Stan Winston and John Dykstra doing the
Yep.
effects. And obviously, Stan Winston... He doesn't need an introduction to see.
Not
and
at
John
all.
Dykstra worked on the original Star Wars, so both legends in the in the special effects field. And yeah, I mean they there's some wacky stuff in this. There's sort of the brain that comes down out of the hole. It's almost like Kang out of the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
And then you got
A
these
little bit.
weird sort of beasts, sort of drone things, aren't they? That are wandering around, obviously really stupid, but got these massive mouths and these weird guns on their shoulders and stuff.
They're just big mouths with legs.
Yeah.
I mean, in the original film, they're a little bit like the thing from another world. It's just like, they're kind of like lizard men that kind of would have like 3 fingers and just kind of run around like this, which is quite amusing. They're more like monster, like alien monster.
Yeah.
It's more caricature. It's more cartoony.
I mean, what I did think, I thought that looks a bit crazy and a bit weird. But then I found myself, obviously it's a guy in a suit, and I was trying to tell, that's his legs, and then because he's got like these big appendages at the back, and that's the guy's arms, and they're obviously walking in a particular way to get that movement. I suppose maybe that took me out of the film slightly, but what I was doing was a sort of, admiring the work that had gone into that, even if it looks a bit, wobbly. And
I was reading, apparently Stan Winston, so he was actually working on Aliens at the same time as this one. There were 2 people, I think, in those costumes.
Oh, were there? Oh, okay.
And he started using 2 people so they didn't look like men in suits.
Yeah.
Because if you've got, people with arms out here and leg going the other way, then it can make the monster look even stranger. Clearly ahead of his time, Stan Winston did some, really interesting stuff in the 80s and into the 90s as well. Did you enjoy this film? What did you think of it?
I did, yeah. I mean, like you say, it's a little bit slow in places, and I think because it is a bit sort of, it kind of carries over, like you said, that B-movie aesthetic from the 50s. So it is more family friendly, rather than gore to replace the sort of paranoia. You still got the paranoia, which would have been in the original, which I guess makes it stand out from all those 80s remakes, which were all just gore for the most part.
One of the noticeable things that's slightly different from the original one. So in the original one, when his parents, you have the boy with his father, and they're looking out through the window with a telescope, and then the mother comes in, you've got to go to bed, that's all the same. But in the original one, when his father goes off, so the boy sees the UFO come down, and his father's like, I'll look at it in the morning. And then he goes off in the morning and comes back. When he comes back in the original one, he's like really angry and mad, and he's like, there's a scene where he hits his kid and knocks him to the floor, and there's a complete change because he's really, really like a nice father, and there's a really good family situation. Whereas in this one, when he comes back, he's not horrible. There's a couple of moments where he's like says at one point to his son, sit down, and that's kind of maybe a bit more demanding. But he's not angry, and he's not mad, and he's not unpleasant. He's more like a confused, like an alien trying to be a human. There's a scene where when the mother becomes an alien as well, or where she's possessed, should we say. And they start trying to eat raw meat, which of course, an alien might, it's a bit like an animal. If an animal suddenly became a human, it'd be like, well, how do I be a human?
Yeah.
The town that this is set in feels a bit like a throwback to the 50s.
Yeah.
You kind of got the white picket fence around the house.
It felt very E.T. to me as well.
E.T. Spielberg. I mean, obviously, there's the Tobe Hooper made Poltergeist, and there's the kind of controversy between, did he direct it or did Spielberg direct it? And I think there's certainly Spielbergian things going on here, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In fact, I think there's a shot in Close Encounters which also has like that shot of the hill. It's out the back of the child's bedroom, out the back of the house, and it's in this one and the original one. The original one has more of an iconic shot, I think, of the hill with the fence going up, and then it's got these trees. It's an amazing visual image, and it has it here as well, but I don't think it's quite as iconic in this movie as it is in the original one. And I have a feeling, I think Spielberg used a similar, when the aliens first buzz over, and Richard Dreyfuss is on the side of the hill with all those other people. That's a similar kind of, it's got sort of road with a fence, and,
Yeah.
I do wonder if that came from the original Invaders from Mars. I found it kind of similar to the Explorers by Joe Dante.
Yeah.
And I think Joe Dante and Tobe Hooper, they're both kind of ideas directors. Especially when the boy goes into the lair of, well, it's the UFO, it's the alien ship, essentially. I read reviews online that said it felt very much like Alien, because this was written by Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, or co-written, should we say, yeah. I found the inside of the ship reminded me a lot like the inside of the ship in the Explorers as well, which I think came out a year before this. And also The Faculty, that one kind of reminded me of that too.
The Faculty, yeah.
Because there's obviously in this, so you've got Louise Fletcher who plays his teacher, and she gets taken over by an alien, and a lot of that felt a lot like The Faculty, which came later, which is a really great film as well.
Yeah, when I was watching, because I hadn't seen it before, and it felt, I thought, oh, this feels very familiar, and then it's because I've seen films after it that obviously borrow from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like Faculty is the sort of school segment expanded into a whole film. Yeah, as in The Faculty, the school features reasonably heavily the teacher character played by Louise Fletcher. I guess she's kind of the lead. They're not aliens, but they're kind of under alien control, aren't they? She goes back to the mothership, converses with this alien brain snake thing. At first, you just think she's a horrible teacher. I mean, whether she is horrible before she becomes possessed by aliens, who knows? Yeah, I mean, the cast, they're great. The kid, David, played by Hunter Carson, but he reminded me of Danny Madigan in Last Action Hero.
Yeah, exactly. Look, David reminds me a bit of the kid in Last Action Hero. Look at that.
So, same haircut.
Yeah, and some of his mannerisms.
Yeah. But he almost carries the film, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah.
He was really good. And Karen Black is his mother. In real life.
I wrote that down as well.
Oh, there you go.
Karen Black's son. Look at that.
So
written exactly.
Yes. Obviously, they have a good chemistry.
They have because of that. I almost thought they had too much good chemistry.
Well, there was a scene where they're hiding in a basement.
Yeah.
She's like really scared, and he puts his hand over her mouth to keep her quiet because there's like possessed policemen looking for them.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's a bit, because it's not, normally you would see it the other way around. The adult would be protecting and keeping the child quiet.
Yeah.
So it was unusual, and the way he looked so comfortable doing it, because I didn't realise that they were mother and son until after I'd watched the film. It didn't look odd, but it looked.
I know what you mean.
Like they were both comfortable with it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Even though they were supposed to be not teacher, but school nurse and pupil. Maybe a little bit too familiar. They work really well together, obviously.
We're only 10 years away from the 70s, but a lot of these actors were quite big in the 70s. I mean, obviously Louise Fletcher's probably most famous role is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jack Nicholson. In fact, Karen Black also worked with, I think she was in 5 Easy Pieces, also with Jack Nicholson. Yeah,
there's a few sort of recognisable character actors that you might not know their name, but you've definitely seen him in other stuff. James Cameron as the General. I mean, I know him, and that's because he was in Return of the Living Dead. Was he also written by Dan O'Bannon. And Dale Dye in there in a very small role.
I ought to make my career!
Who I've met.
Did you meet Dale Dye?
I met Dale Dye.
Where did you meet Dale Dye?
Back in my video game magazine days, I went to an event for one of the Medal of Honor games. I mean, it was really early. I don't know how long ago. Maybe 20 years ago, slightly less.
Yeah.
But they had an event at I'm pretty sure it was at the Imperial War Museum. I mean, where else?
Where else?
And so obviously you had PR people there and lots of people from various video game websites and magazines. They had Captain Dale Dye there as well, and obviously they had PlayStation set up so you could have a go and free booze. So I partook in the free booze and then tried to have a game of Medal of. I was a big Medal of Honor fan.
Yeah.
Having a go, I couldn't duck. It was right at the beginning of the level. There was a bit where you had to duck under a hole in the wall. I knew what the duck button was because I'd played Medal of Honor before, and it would not work. I was like, what the hell? And I was a little bit drunk, so I was just messing around. I was just shooting people. There was lots of sort of NPCs around me. People on my side. I couldn't kill them, so I was just shooting them. And Captain Dye was like, he's shooting his own guys. And I was like, Captain Dye, how do you duck? And he goes, I don't know. That's my Captain Dale Dye story. And he probably thought I was some pissed up English cat. But the controller's broken, so what can I say? I couldn't duck. So my experience of that Medal of Honor game was not good.
I don't know how to follow that up. That's amazing. I'll tell you, I'll follow it up with the police chief in this film is the kid from the original.
Oh, right, there you
Invaders
go. Wow.
From Mars.
Cool.
That's not a great follow-up to that amazing story.
It's a good fact, though.
Yeah, Jimmy Hunt, he played David in the original film, and he plays the police chief in this one. He was in his 40s. He looked considerably older, because we're also in our 40s, and he looked like an old man.
I'm trying to remember what the police chief looked like. Was he one of the ones looking for them in the basement?
Yeah, there is a line he uses. He says something like, "I haven't been up there since I was a kid." That's a great line.
Very good. I see. I didn't. Yeah. If you know who that is, then that makes that's a nice little nod there, isn't it? In the basement, in that scene, there's like on a filing cabinet or something.
Yep.
There's like a model of the supreme leader or whatever from
the original. Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a bit all over the place at times, this film, but I think it's really enjoyable. It's very colourful. I think it makes use, of a lot of colour. I mean, obviously Tobe Hooper has had his ups and his downs. Famous for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if you don't know who he is. That's his most famous film, and that's probably what he is remembered for, because he obviously passed away a few years ago.
It's a bit light on why the aliens have... I mean, there's a little bit of explanation. I mean, I suppose a lot of these alien invasion films, they're just invading just because they can. So I guess maybe it does slightly explain it.
There's a section, isn't there, which I think is different to the original one. I think it's not really a spoiler, because there's at one point they're launching a rocket themselves to go to Mars.
Yeah.
And now, of course, like a probe, and of course, if these guys are coming, because they blow the rocket up. So are they stopping us from going to them by doing what we are going to do to them to us? I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
I mean, they could just come down and say, "Can you just not fire rockets at our planet, please? Thanks, bye."
Yeah.
But no, they decide to stick things in people's necks and take them over.
They do. They do.
I mean, not very good at diplomacy.
But then are we? We wouldn't be.
No, probably not, no. To be fair. How did you feel about the ending? We won't spoil it.
We won't spoil it. So the very, very ending... Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Well, the last, 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Well, that's not in the original film.
Right, okay.
That ending is different from the original film.
Because my kids were like, what?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those, which has been done in other films as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get to it and you're like... okay, all right. But then...
I mean, I didn't see it coming. It does one thing, but then it does something else. It's like, what?
It's a shame that they didn't keep it to the original. And I mean, the original ending is not, it just ends pretty much.
We win.
I wasn't so sold on it.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure why they decided to go that route.
I love to be sort of surprised by, particularly by an ending and not expect what's coming. But I don't know if I really, kind of, I don't buy that, sorry.
I've read about it after watching the film. A lot of the film is shot from his point of view.
Yeah.
There's lots of shots that are looking up. I mean, the first time you see the mum, when you're introduced to the boy and his father, played by Timothy Bottoms, we haven't said, they're lying down just at the back of their house and they're looking up at the stars, and there's like a meteorite shower or shooting stars going over. I think it's a meteorite shower. And then the mum comes into frame and she just kind of comes in the corner of the frame, and so it's obviously looking up at her. And I think a lot of the shots, the boy is in much of the film, pretty much all of the film.
Yeah.
And so it's all from his point of view. So from that, looking at what happens at the end, you can kind of see where it's going. But it was a shock, and I don't know if it needed to be like that. Yeah. It's a shame. But where did you see it? Because we don't have it.
No, I've wanted to see it for ages. I think it might have been on Netflix. So I saw it on there, I put it on my watch list, and then I thought, should I watch that? And then it had gone. I was like, which is the problem with streaming, isn't it? So I saw there was a Blu-ray. I thought, I'll stick that on my wish list on Amazon. I thought, I'll pick that up someday. I think the other day I was like, I really want to see that. Had a look, and the price had skyrocketed because it's gone out of print. I was like, for Christ's sake. I mean, in the States it was released by Screen Factory, and that's like, ridiculous money now, because again, that's out of print. I think I was on Letterboxd. The Letterboxd will tell you where you can watch stuff. Right. And it said it was on Amazon Prime. I was like, aha.
Okay.
So I went and double checked, and there it was. So I thought, right, I'm going to watch it before it disappears.
I have actually seen it before, years and years and years ago, and I couldn't really remember much of it at all. I prefer the original one still.
I'll have to check that out.
I think it's different. It's totally different, but I think visually that one's really cool. Like I said, there are images in that I still to this day remember. I mean, another thing that is similar between the two, but done slightly differently, is that when they're taken by the alien ship, they're kind of sucked into the ground,
right? Yeah.
Which is a really cool effect, where they kind of go down into the ground in the sand. Which is a little bit in this one, but it's much more prominent in the original one. It's more eerie in the original one. The other cool thing with the original one is the soundtrack. I mean, the soundtrack's quite cool here. Music's done by Christopher Young in this film. And in the original one, when they go up into the woods, you get this kind of choral men and women singing But then what's different here, they do use a little bit of that in this film, but in that film, in the original film, they can hear it, the characters can hear it as they go up to it. They hear this kind of choral singing, and it's really eerie. And then they shoot down under the ground, and there's this amazing effect for the 50s of the sand opening up, and you see them drop down in the distance up on the hill, but then it kind of cuts to the sand, covering itself over again. It's a very cool effect for then, and I think almost it was a cooler effect then than in Tobe Hooper's one.
I watched the original Blob quite recently, having seen the 80s one.
The McQueen ones, yeah.
Which, I'd rather the 80s one, personally. It was okay. I couldn't really buy him as a teenager, seeing he was about 30 or something. And the Blob just wasn't particularly scary. I mean, again, in the 50s, I'm sure it was. And if you watch it as a child, it probably would be, but...
That's the thing. I mean, the original Invaders from Mars, when I first saw it, I found it really terrifying. It was really eerie. The music's creepy. The whole way it's put together is really, really well done. And I think this is more comical, although this is almost more B-movie than the original one, actually. It's more kind of, crazy. It's very colourful, almost like the Blob. It's very colourful. It's very all over the place. Very crazy. Lots of strange visuals and mad characters and... So that was Invaders from Mars, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to push that bell for notifications. Check out some of our other videos, there'll be some links around here somewhere, and we'll see you again soon for another video.